Something extraordinary is unfolding today, and I genuinely do not think most people have realized just how significant this moment truly is. There are certain days when the sky seems to whisper, and then there are days when it completely rewrites the conversation. Today belongs to the second kind. On this Friday, August 7th, the Moon enters Gemini and almost immediately forms a conjunction with Uranus. If you have spent any time studying Uranus, then you already understand that this planet never arrives quietly. It does not send polite signals or offer gentle hints. Uranus tears away what has become stagnant and reveals what has been hidden beneath the surface all along. That is why what arrives today may not simply feel surprising. It may feel like a missing piece of your own story suddenly falling into place. The answer that has remained just beyond your reach, the realization you have chased through endless overthinking, the understanding that refused to become clear, no matter how many times you replayed the situation in your mind. All of it now stands on the edge of becoming unmistakably obvious. What makes this even more remarkable is that this is not an isolated lunar event. The Moon meeting Uranus is only one part of a much larger celestial design unfolding at exactly the same time. There are at least 3 additional major astrological patterns aligning alongside this transit, creating a level of precision that feels almost impossible to dismiss. As each layer is placed beside the next, the entire picture begins to reveal itself, and the timing becomes so exact that it challenges the idea of coincidence altogether. Everything appears to have been arranged with extraordinary intention. Before we explore each piece individually, there is something especially important I want certain viewers to hear. If your sun, moon, or rising sign is Gemini, Virgo, or Sagittarius, today may become one of those unforgettable turning points that you recognize only after your entire perspective has shifted. The impact may arrive suddenly, almost without warning, yet what it brings has the potential to redirect your path in ways that extend far beyond this single day. Later in this video, I will explain exactly why these 3 signs are standing at the center of today's energetic landscape, and why the clarity arriving now could influence decisions that shape the next chapter of your life. But before we reach that point, I want to speak directly to anyone who has been struggling mentally over the past several weeks. If you have felt as though your thoughts have become unusually slow, as if every decision required exhausting effort, or as though every conversation left you even more confused than before, you are not imagining it. Perhaps you have questioned your own judgment, wondered why simple answers suddenly became difficult to recognize, or felt trapped inside endless mental loops that never seemed to produce resolution. If any of that sounds familiar, stay with me, because there is a very specific astrological reason behind those experiences, and that pattern is reaching its conclusion today. The period that has been clouding your thinking is finally ending, and understanding why requires looking back at the journey Mercury has been taking over the past several weeks. To appreciate the significance of today, we have to revisit the beginning of the cycle. Mercury stationed retrograde on June 29th, and remained in that retrograde motion until turning direct on July 23rd and July 24th. For many people, that stretch felt exhausting in ways that reached far beyond simple inconvenience. Conversations became tangled, messages disappeared or arrived too late, plans that once seemed certain suddenly unraveled, agreements stalled without explanation, discussions circled endlessly without producing any meaningful progress. It often felt as though communication itself had become unreliable, leaving people uncertain about what was true and what could actually be trusted. Then Mercury finally stationed direct, and everyone expected immediate relief. Yet instead of instant clarity, many noticed that something still felt unfinished. Movement returned, but resistance remained. It was almost as if the machinery had started operating again, while hidden obstacles continued grinding beneath the surface. That lingering sensation had an important explanation. Mercury had entered its post-retrograde shadow, a phase that many people overlook because all of the attention is usually placed on the retrograde itself. In reality, the direct station is not the true conclusion of Mercury's story. The shadow period that follows serves a completely different purpose. It is where the unfinished pieces are gathered together. It is where confusion slowly transforms into understanding. It is where delays reveal their hidden purpose. Misunderstandings begin making sense, and every experience from the retrograde gradually integrates into a larger lesson. Instead of creating new disruption, the shadow allows everything that was previously scattered to organize itself into something coherent. This is the stage where the deeper meaning finally becomes visible. That is exactly why today's timing carries such extraordinary weight. Friday, August 7th, marks the precise moment Mercury completely exits that shadow. Today, Mercury crosses the very degree where the retrograde originally began, approximately 6 weeks ago. Symbolically and astrologically, the cycle has now reached its full completion. Mercury is no longer carrying the unfinished business of late June. It is moving freely once again. Now pause and consider what is happening simultaneously. On the exact same day that Mercury fully liberates itself from the retrograde cycle, the Moon joins Uranus in Gemini, the very sign ruled by Mercury. These two events occurring together create a powerful symbolic pattern. The planet connected with thought, communication, perception, and decision-making finally releases weeks of accumulated tension, while the planet associated with sudden awakening delivers an unexpected breakthrough inside Mercury's own domain. This is not merely interesting timing. It forms a remarkably coherent cosmic design. It creates the ideal conditions for answers to emerge precisely where uncertainty once dominated. Questions that have remained unresolved since late June may suddenly become obvious. A conversation that previously collapsed into misunderstanding may now reveal its true meaning. An email that disappeared beneath countless distractions may resurface at exactly the right moment. A decision that felt impossible because every option appeared equally confusing may suddenly become effortless because the missing perspective finally arrives. The clarity emerging today is unlikely to unfold gradually. Uranus rarely operates that way. Instead, realization often appears all at once, transforming confusion into certainty almost instantly. If you have sensed unusual emotional pressure building throughout this week, trust that instinct, because the energy leading into today has been steadily intensifying. None of it has been accidental. Each day has quietly prepared the ground for this breakthrough. The opening days of August carried noticeable emotional weight. On August 1st, Venus formed a square with Lilith, bringing unresolved tension into relationships and exposing places where balance had quietly disappeared. Many people suddenly became aware of unequal dynamics, suppressed emotions, or truths that had remained unspoken for far too long. Situations that once seemed manageable began revealing deeper discomfort beneath the surface, encouraging honesty where silence had previously felt easier. Then, on August 3rd, Chiron, the wounded healer, stationed retrograde. Whenever Chiron begins its retrograde journey, attention naturally shifts inward. Rather than focusing on external events, the energy asks us to revisit the places within ourselves that still require understanding and healing. It is as though the universe gently closes the door to outside distractions and reminds us that the next stage of growth begins by looking within. There comes a point in every healing journey when life quietly circles back to the places you thought you had already left behind. At first, it can feel discouraging, almost as though you are moving backward instead of forward. Yet that is not what is actually happening. Sometimes the universe brings an old pain back into your awareness, because this time you finally possess the wisdom, the strength, and the perspective to resolve it instead of simply surviving it. That deeper invitation has been unfolding over the past several days. As Chiron continues its retrograde motion, the message becomes unmistakable. The attention is no longer focused on changing the outside world first. Instead, it asks you to return inward, revisit the emotional landscapes you once avoided, and allow genuine healing to happen where old scars have quietly continued shaping your choices. Then, on August 4th, another important shift entered the story as the moon moved into Taurus. Almost immediately, the emotional atmosphere became slower, steadier, and far more grounded. Whether you consciously recognized it or not, many people experienced an overwhelming desire to pause. Instead of constantly reacting to the rapid pace of change surrounding them, there was an instinctive need to breathe, remain still, and search for something dependable beneath the uncertainty. It may have felt as though your emotions became heavier, not because something was wrong, but because your inner world was asking for stability before the next transformation could begin. Rather than rushing ahead, you were being encouraged to anchor yourself while everything else continued changing around you. That process deepened further with the arrival of the last quarter moon in Taurus on August 5th. Within the lunar cycle, this phase represents a critical turning point, a moment where release becomes more important than accumulation. Its purpose is never to punish. Instead, it asks an honest question. What have you continued carrying that no longer belongs in the life you're trying to create? For some people, the answer may involve physical possessions. For others, it could be a belief, an attachment, a habit, or a sense of security that has quietly become a burden rather than a source of strength. Whatever form it takes, the energy of this lunar phase gently but firmly encourages you to loosen your grip. What once provided comfort may now be preventing growth, and the weight you have grown accustomed to may actually be the very thing slowing your progress. Then, yesterday, another layer was added as Venus entered Libra, and the emotional atmosphere shifted almost immediately. The emphasis moved away from clinging to what felt familiar and toward restoring balance wherever imbalance had quietly developed. Relationships, partnerships, and emotional exchanges suddenly became the primary focus. Questions surrounding fairness, reciprocity, harmony, and mutual understanding naturally rose to the surface. The attention was no longer centered on protecting what you had. Instead, it became about creating healthier equilibrium with the people who matter most. Looking back across these consecutive days, a remarkable pattern begins to emerge. Relationship tension initiated by earlier transits. Chiron, reopening emotional wounds for deeper healing. The grounding influence of the moon in Taurus. The releasing energy of the last quarter moon. And the arrival of Venus in Libra have not been isolated experiences. They have all been preparing you for one defining moment. That moment arrives today. During the early morning hours, at approximately 2 o'clock during the night, the moon leaves the dense and deliberate earth energy of Taurus behind and enters the quick, adaptable, and intellectually alive atmosphere of Gemini. Within only a matter of hours, it reaches Uranus. The symbolism of that transition is profound. The emotional weight that has kept your attention anchored inside the physical world suddenly gives way to mental movement, fresh perspective, and rapid insight. It resembles the experience of sitting for hours in darkness before someone unexpectedly turns on the light. The room itself has not changed, yet everything inside it instantly becomes visible. That is why today's realization has the potential to feel so immediate. The circumstances themselves may not be entirely new, but your ability to understand them changes in an instant. This brings us to the astrological pattern that deserves even closer attention. When many people first hear that the moon is conjunct Uranus, their minds naturally expect disruption, unpredictability, or sudden upheaval. Uranus certainly possesses the ability to produce dramatic shifts, but today another celestial pattern dramatically changes how that energy is likely to unfold. A grand air trine is forming across the sky, and understanding its influence explains why today's breakthrough carries a very different quality. In astrology, A trine represents a 120-degree relationship between planets, one of the most supportive and harmonious aspects available. Instead of friction, it creates effortless movement. Instead of resistance, it encourages natural flow. When three planetary points connect through trines while occupying the same element, they create a complete energetic circuit, allowing that elemental quality to circulate continuously without interruption. Today, that circuit is formed through the Moon and Uranus, together in Gemini, Venus newly established in Libra, and Pluto positioned in Aquarius. All three occupy air signs and remain within only a few degrees of one another, completing the grand air trine. Because air governs thought, communication, perspective, ideas, and human connection, this configuration creates an extraordinary pathway for insight to travel through every level of your experience. The revelation delivered by the Moon meeting Uranus does not remain isolated inside your mind. It naturally extends into your relationships through Venus in Libra, while simultaneously influencing larger patterns of transformation represented by Pluto in Aquarius. That is why today's surprise may feel liberating instead of destabilizing. Yes, an illusion could dissolve. A long-held assumption may collapse. Something you believed with certainty could suddenly reveal a completely different truth. Yet rather than leaving you confused, the understanding that replaces it feels strangely natural. It carries the quiet sensation of recognizing something your deeper self already knew, but had never been able to express with words. This quality is remarkably uncommon. Uranus often introduces change so abruptly that people require considerable time to emotionally recover. Today, however, the support of the grand air trine allows the realization to integrate almost immediately. Instead of spending weeks trying to understand what happened, you recognize the truth, accept it, and begin moving forward without hesitation. There is one additional layer that makes this entire moment even more extraordinary, and surprisingly few people are discussing it. Right now, Jupiter, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus all occupy approximately 4 degrees within their respective signs. Jupiter stands at 4 degrees Leo. Pluto remains at 4 degrees Aquarius. Neptune occupies 4 degrees Aries. Uranus sits at 4 degrees Gemini. These are 4 of the slowest moving planets in astrology, bodies associated with collective evolution, generational transformation, and the long, unfolding chapters of history itself. They rarely align with this kind of mathematical precision because their movements unfold across immense spans of time. When they gather in this way, many astrologers view the pattern as the formation of a powerful evolutionary circuit, an intricate network composed of sextiles, trines, and oppositions that remain interconnected beneath the surface. Yet even a circuit of enormous potential does not fully activate on its own. It quietly accumulates energy, waiting patiently until a faster-moving celestial body crosses the shared 4-degree point and awakens the entire structure into motion. The moment the Moon reaches 4 degrees of Gemini and unites with Uranus today, something far greater is set into motion than a single astrological transit. What appears to be one emotional breakthrough is actually the spark that awakens an entire network of planetary energy that has been quietly waiting beneath the surface. Imagine a complex system that has been fully assembled, every connection already in place, every pathway prepared, but nothing activates until one final switch is turned. That is the significance of this exact moment. As the Moon touches Uranus at 4 degrees of Gemini, it does not simply awaken Uranus alone. It sends energy throughout the entire evolutionary pattern that has been forming between these outer planets. The realization that reaches you today is therefore much more than an interesting thought or an emotional reaction. It carries implications that extend into multiple areas of your life simultaneously. The insight connects directly with Jupiter in Leo, awakening themes connected to courage, self-expression, confidence, and your creative identity. At the same time, it reaches Neptune in Aries, opening a pathway toward greater spiritual understanding and a clearer relationship with your own inner truth. Simultaneously, that same realization interacts with Pluto in Aquarius, challenging the structures, expectations, and systems that may have quietly shaped your life for far too long. Instead of remaining isolated inside your mind, one moment of awareness begins creating movement across every level of your personal evolution. That is why today's breakthrough has the potential to feel so profound. It is not simply providing information. It has the capacity to reorganize the direction of your life beginning now, rather than at some distant point in the future. This is not the type of clarity that waits patiently for perfect timing. It arrives ready to transform your decisions immediately. Before we turn our attention to the 3 zodiac signs standing closest to this energy, there is another important piece of today's sky that deserves careful attention because it completely changes the meaning of what you receive. The moon is currently traveling through its waning crescent phase. With each passing hour, its light becomes smaller, quieter, and more refined. Symbolically, that matters tremendously. This is not the expansive illumination associated with a full moon, where everything suddenly becomes impossible to ignore all at once. The waning crescent carries an entirely different message. Its wisdom is not centered on gaining more. It focuses on releasing what has already completed its purpose. That means the understanding arriving today is unlikely to burden you with additional responsibilities or endless new questions. Instead, it reveals exactly what no longer deserves your energy. Perhaps it is an outdated belief that has quietly limited your potential. Perhaps it is a relationship that no longer reflects the person you are becoming. Perhaps it is a story you have repeated to yourself for months that no longer represents reality. Whatever form it takes, today's insight does not simply expose the truth. It helps you separate yourself from the illusion you have been carrying. Uranus provides the shock of sudden awareness, while the waning crescent offers permission to finally release what that awareness makes unnecessary. Those two forces working together create an unusually powerful opportunity for genuine freedom. The timing becomes even more meaningful because only 5 days from now, on August the 12th, a solar eclipse arrives in Leo. That eclipse carries themes of stepping fully into personal authority, creative expression, leadership, and authentic self-confidence. Yet it is difficult to embrace that future while still carrying the confusion, hesitation, and mental uncertainty created throughout June and July. Today's astrology appears designed to remove that obstacle. It clears away lingering doubt before the eclipse introduces the next stage of your journey. Seen from that perspective, today is less about beginning something completely new and more about completing what has already run its course. The chapter ending now creates the space necessary for the next one to begin with, far greater clarity and purpose. With that foundation established, let us begin with the first zodiac sign, standing directly beneath today's energy, Gemini. If your sun, moon, or rising sign is Gemini, this transit speaks to the deepest level of your personal identity. Uranus is now traveling through your first house, the area of the chart associated with your sense of self, your physical presence, and the way you naturally introduce yourself to the world. Its arrival there in April marked the beginning of an 8-year cycle devoted to personal reinvention. That process, however, did not begin in isolation. During the previous 8 years, Uranus traveled through your 12th house, one of the most private and psychologically complex regions of the natal chart. Much of that cycle unfolded invisibly. While others may not have recognized the depth of your internal transformation, you were confronting fears, unconscious patterns, and emotional habits that had quietly shaped your identity for years. Much of that work happened behind closed doors, hidden from public view, almost like a caterpillar enclosed within a cocoon, while profound change occurred beyond anyone else's awareness. Today represents the moment that enclosure finally opens. As the moon joins Uranus in Gemini and activates your first house, The question rising to the surface becomes beautifully simple, while simultaneously deeply profound. Who are you now? Chances are you have already sensed that the answer you once relied upon no longer feels true. Mercury retrograde likely intensified that uncertainty even more. Because Mercury rules Gemini, this retrograde cycle may have affected you more personally than many other signs. You may have struggled to describe your own desires. You may have questioned your direction or found yourself unable to express what was changing inside you. It may have felt as though your reflection no longer matched the person slowly emerging beneath the surface. The identity you presented outwardly and the reality you experienced internally may have drifted further apart with each passing week. Today, that separation begins dissolving. As the Moon and Uranus unite, a powerful moment of self-recognition becomes possible. This realization is not dependent upon external approval, validation, or someone else's opinion. It rises naturally from within, sudden, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore, almost like lightning illuminating a landscape that had been hidden in darkness only moments before. You recognize yourself in a completely new way. The version of your identity built around pleasing others, adapting to expectations, or living according to patterns established long ago no longer feels necessary. Rather than grieving that older version of yourself, you may discover an unexpected sense of liberation. The grand air trine strengthens this process even further by supporting your fifth house through Venus, encouraging creative expression, while Pluto energizes your ninth house, inviting expansion, broader vision, and courageous growth. Because of that support, many Geminis may feel inspired to take immediate and highly visible action. It could appear as a dramatic change in personal style or physical appearance, the launch of a creative project that has remained hidden until now, or a public declaration that surprises the people who believe they already knew exactly who you were. For Gemini, today represents far more than the arrival of a helpful insight. It marks the conclusion of a conversation that has been repeating inside your own mind for far longer than you probably realized. For weeks, perhaps even longer, your thoughts have circled around the same questions, returning to familiar doubts, replaying old possibilities, searching for certainty that always seemed just beyond reach. That exhausting cycle finally reaches its natural ending now because the missing piece no longer needs to be searched for. It arrives on its own. Even more meaningful is what that realization actually reveals. It is not asking you to construct an entirely different identity or reinvent yourself from the beginning. Instead, it gently uncovers the version of you that has quietly remained underneath layers of expectations, compromises, social conditioning, and the constant habit of adjusting yourself so other people would feel comfortable. Somewhere along the way, you learned how to edit parts of your personality, soften your opinions, minimize your gifts, or reshape yourself to fit environments that were never designed for your authentic nature. Today invites you to stop doing that. The understanding that comes through the Moon joining Uranus encourages you to embrace every dimension of your identity, including the parts you once believed were too unconventional, too complicated, or too different to be fully accepted. The remarkable shift is that this acceptance no longer depends upon outside approval. For the first time in what may feel like years, confidence begins growing from within, instead of being borrowed from the reactions of other people. You stop wondering whether your authentic self is enough because, deep inside, you already know the answer. That quiet certainty changes everything. Now let us turn toward Virgo. Because your breakthrough unfolds in an entirely different area of life, yet it carries no less significance. If your sun, moon, or rising sign is Virgo, I want you to listen especially carefully, because today's astrology reaches the highest point of your natal chart. Uranus is now moving through Gemini in your 10th house. The area connected with your career, your public reputation, your achievements, your life purpose, and the contribution you are here to make in the wider world. This is not where the story began, Before entering this part of your chart, Uranus spent the previous 8 years traveling through your ninth house, quietly transforming your beliefs, expanding your education, challenging your understanding of the world, and encouraging you to question ideas that once felt unquestionably true. Those years were never simply about gathering knowledge. They were preparing you to become someone whose outer life could finally reflect everything your inner world had already learned. Now that Uranus has entered your 10th house, those invisible changes are asking to become visible. This transition carries even greater importance because Mercury rules Virgo as well. The Mercury retrograde stretching across June and July likely felt unusually personal. Professional discussions may have become tangled without explanation. Conversations with supervisors, clients, or leadership may have seemed impossible to navigate successfully. Projects that deserved progress may have stalled repeatedly despite your careful preparation and consistent effort. As frustrating as those external circumstances were, an even deeper question may have been quietly growing underneath them. You may have begun wondering whether your career still reflected who you were becoming. Every attempt to identify exactly what needed to change may have dissolved before you could fully understand it, leaving you with an uncomfortable sense that something no longer fit, even though you could not yet explain why. That uncertainty begins dissolving today. As the moon joins Uranus inside your 10th house, clarity arrives regarding your professional direction and your greater purpose. For some Virgos, this realization may appear through circumstances outside your control. An unexpected opportunity could suddenly emerge in a profession you never seriously considered. A restructuring within your organization might create possibilities that did not exist only yesterday. Someone in authority could unexpectedly step aside, revealing an opening that had previously been unavailable. For others, the breakthrough happens entirely within your own awareness. You may suddenly recognize that your abilities have expanded beyond the limits of your current environment, that your present work no longer challenges your potential, or that the perfectionism and constant responsibility that once motivated you are no longer capable of carrying you into your future. Virgo rarely enjoys making impulsive decisions. You naturally prefer thoughtful preparation, practical planning, and carefully measured progress. Dramatic change is not usually your first instinct, yet today's sky presents a different picture. The grand air trine strengthens your 2nd house through Venus, highlighting income, stability, and personal resources, while Pluto energizes your 6th house of work, service, routines, and daily contribution. Because of this support, moving in a new direction does not resemble reckless risk. Instead, it begins to feel like the most rational, intelligent, and sustainable choice available. Whether your next step involves embracing emerging technology, building an independent career, changing industries, or redefining your public identity altogether, today's clarity helps you recognize that remaining where you have been may actually involve greater uncertainty than moving forward. Little by little, the anxiety surrounding your future begins transforming into something you may not have experienced for quite some time. Genuine excitement returns. Rather than fearing what tomorrow might bring, you begin looking toward it with anticipation. Even if that feels difficult to imagine while watching this video, pay close attention by the end of today, because I believe your emotional relationship with your future may already feel noticeably lighter. Now we come to Sagittarius. And emotionally, this may be the most powerful experience of all 3 signs. If your sun, moon, or rising sign is Sagittarius, Uranus is currently traveling through Gemini in your 7th house. The part of your natal chart governing committed relationships, marriage, business partnerships, and every meaningful one-to-one connection that shapes your life. Astrologers often refer to this as the house of the other, because it reflects the people who walk beside you through life's most significant experiences. For a sign that naturally values independence, exploration, and personal freedom, Uranus moving through this area creates an especially transformative influence. Throughout Mercury, retrograde during June and July, relationship dynamics may have become increasingly difficult to ignore. Important discussions may have repeatedly failed to reach resolution. Negotiations may have stalled over and over again. Conversations with a romantic partner or business associate may have continued circling around identical issues without producing genuine understanding. Beneath all of those repeated experiences, you may have quietly sensed that something fundamental within an important relationship had shifted. Yet every attempt to identify exactly what was wrong seemed to disappear before becoming fully clear. Today changes that completely. As the moon joins Uranus inside your seventh house, the truth surrounding your closest partnerships steps fully into view. With remarkable objectivity, you begin recognizing whether an important relationship is genuinely built upon shared growth, mutual respect, authentic compatibility, and a common future, or whether it has simply continued because routine became easier than change. Familiarity replaced genuine connection. Obligation overshadowed desire, or fear prevented honest decisions. The uncertainty that has surrounded this relationship loses its power because the answer no longer hides behind confusion. It becomes unmistakably visible. For some Sagittarians, this realization may arrive through an external event. A partner could unexpectedly reveal information you were not expecting. A message may suddenly appear that changes your perspective. A document might provide clarity where uncertainty previously existed. Someone's behavior could shift dramatically enough to expose intentions that words alone had never revealed. For many others, however, the breakthrough takes place internally. One unmistakable moment of knowing changes the meaning of everything that came before it. Does this automatically mean every Sagittarius experiences an ending today? Absolutely not. In many cases, Uranus liberates an existing relationship instead of dissolving it. Outdated habits disappear. Restrictive expectations fall away. New possibilities emerge that allow two people to reconnect in healthier and more authentic ways. For others, however, the realization is that the relationship has already fulfilled its purpose. Uranus rarely encourages prolonged transitions. When something has completed its role, it tends to remove unnecessary delays with surprising speed. Fortunately, today's broader astrology offers remarkable support throughout that process. The grand air trine strengthens your 11th house through Venus, emphasizing friendships, supportive communities, future dreams, and meaningful social connections. While Pluto energizes your 3rd house of communication, allowing you to express yourself with unusual honesty, confidence, and precision. You no longer feel obligated to justify every decision or apologize for choosing your own well-being. One truth settles firmly into place. A healthy partnership should never require sacrificing your freedom in order to preserve the connection. That understanding alone has the power to reshape your future. Whether your path continues beside someone you love or leads you toward a new chapter independently, you move forward with far greater authenticity than before. When we step back and observe today's astrology as a whole, one pattern becomes impossible to overlook. None of these planetary movements exist in isolation. The conjunction between the Moon and Uranus, Mercury finally completing its post-retrograde shadow, and the grand air trines stretching across the sky are all working together as parts of one larger process. They are preparing you for what comes next. Only 5 days from today, on August 12th, a solar eclipse takes place in Leo. That eclipse emphasizes creative leadership, personal confidence, authentic self-expression, and the courage to fully claim your own path. Yet embracing that opportunity would be extraordinarily difficult if your mind remained trapped inside the confusion, hesitation, and unanswered questions that accumulated throughout June and July. That is precisely why today's astrology carries such importance. It clears away the remaining mental fog before the eclipse introduces an entirely new chapter. It removes lingering uncertainty, so your next decisions can be made from confidence instead of fear. Then, on August 28th, the full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces brings another stage of completion by dissolving whatever emotional residue still remains from this entire process. Viewed together, the month reveals an extraordinary progression. It begins by transforming confusion into unmistakable clarity. That clarity becomes the foundation for profound personal transformation. Finally, transformation gives way to emotional release, allowing space for an entirely different future to emerge. Today stands exactly at the center of that sequence. It is the bridge between the life you have been untangling and the one you are now ready to begin. I truly believe that for some of you, years from now, you will look back on this day and recognize it as the quiet turning point where everything started changing. Before we conclude, I simply want to express my sincere gratitude for sharing this time with me. Your willingness to explore these moments together means more than you may realize. If today's message resonated with you in a meaningful way, I would truly appreciate your support by subscribing, because every person who joins this community helps these conversations continue reaching those who may need them most. I would also love to hear your story. If you are a Gemini, Virgo, or Sagittarius, what has this recent journey felt like for you? Where have you been searching for understanding? What kind of breakthrough are you hoping today will bring? I spent time reading every comment because your experiences give life to these astrological cycles, and seeing how these transits unfold through real people is always deeply meaningful. Take gentle care of yourself today, and I look forward to meeting you again very soon as we continue exploring the next chapter together.